This interdisciplinary seminar on the problems of drug abuse is admirable. I think there's so many problems of this nature that require an interdisciplinary approach, whether it be mental health or the race problem. And certainly from the theological side, in the seminary, preparation of men for the ministry, this kind of approach is now being widely used. But I'd like to begin by suggesting that there are definite problems that face us as we approach this problem. It may have come too late, such a seminar as this. There are many indications that we have become a drug-dependent people with social sanctions which will be very difficult to change. Jules Saltman quotes Dr. Carl Abang, director of Norway's Health Services. He says, "It is my belief that we are overlooking a more serious health problem than even narcotic addiction. The increasing number of persons not suffering from any disease who do not feel well unless they consume daily a quota of tablets, mixtures, or other drug preparations. One may very well call this a general drug dependence. We seem to be in danger of producing a behavior pattern in which drugs are being more and more regarded as a general substitute for healthy life habits." Throughout this paper, I would like to use the term drug dependence, the larger term, which is, as you know, is utilized by the World Health Organization as a more inclusive term and more clearly indicative of the problem we face. Drug dependence and chemical salvation have become an accepted part of our culture. And I think that we've got to face this fact as we try to deal with the problem. Legal prescriptions for amphetamines, tranquilizers, and barbiturates are filled by the millions and provide a multi-million-dollar business. A central nervous system depressant to which 5 or 6 million Americans are addicted receives the widest kind of public approval and promotion in the mass media. I'm speaking of ethyl alcohol, against which there is little organized opposition left, and only a minimal concern for the addicted. For the past 30 years, we've been told that the legalization of alcoholic beverages and the treatment of alcoholism as an illness would enable us to control the excessive use of alcohol and provide for the needed rehabilitation of the addict. My observation to the contrary is that we have only succeeded in creating a drinking culture where people do not want to hear about alcoholism or chemical blood tests for safety, because this seems to threaten their individual right to drink as they fairly well please. A discerning look at alcohol beverage advertising shows it to be the chemical salvation theme, a sure pathway to friends, fun, social, economic, and sexual success. The same kind of cultural approval has been established for the nicotine fix, which is perhaps the most widespread addiction in the Western world. The social acceptance of tobacco as a chemical stimulant, with all the surrounding salvation promises of its advertisers, plus its significant place in the American economy, helped to create a disposition toward general drug dependence, even outside the area of legal drug prescriptions. We are presently aware of the extreme difficulty in curtailing the sale of cigarettes. All of this is to say that there is a sea of influence around us which offers social approval for chemical salvation and drug dependence. The use of marijuana is presently being justified by comparison with the narcotic effects of beverage alcohol, now legal and quite acceptable socially. We are swimming against the current as we seek solutions to the problems of drug abuse. American culture is also in the grips of a new hedonism, a playboy, pleasure-seeking philosophy in contrast to the Protestant ethic of work, responsibility, and self-discipline. Affluence, automation, the ethical corrosion of repeated wars, and the impact of various ideological determinisms, many of which have made their impact in the university, have contributed to this fun and kicks philosophy as close as the nearest TV set in Slickback magazine. Addiction-prone people are encouraged to have a try at anything that promises escape and excitement. Therefore, as we seek to solve the problems of drug abuse, let us be aware that drug abuse is only a small part of the social sickness and cultural drift of our age. The intricate complexity of the problem should warn us against quick solutions and easy answers. Drug use, and abuse in theological perspective. A recent debate with a permanent proponent of legalized parimutuel betting in Indianapolis made me realize the wide divergence in approach to morality. This gentleman kept insisting that legalized gambling was not a moral issue. He preferred to restrict morality to religious matters, and it was also clear that he had restricted religion to a very narrow, pigeonholed existence apart from daily decision-making. But from a Christian view, faith and morality have to do with every level of human decision-making. Oversimplified, morality has to do with whatever helps or hinders the fulfillment of persons so that they may live in harmony with their own nature and the nature of reality. Of course, the unanswered questions in this statement I've just made have to do with the nature of reality, the nature of man, and what constitutes help or hindrance, and we can have a quick debate on any one of these items. Christians believe that every individual is loved by God and hence of the highest value as a person. God seeks full humanity for every person and true community for society. Whatever contributes to full humanity for the individual and true community for society is God's will and hence good. Whatever hurts our humanity and destroys community is evil. And I've tried to be brief, and this is oversimplified. In the light of such a moral position, any use of drugs is right which contributes to the welfare, strengthening, and growth of persons toward fulfillment of their God-given potentialities. Conversely, any use of drugs is wrong which contributes directly or indirectly to the blocking of such fulfillment of personhood or to the destruction of community in the family, vocation, or state. Now we may ask, does the chronic use of self-prescribed drugs hurt persons and hinder community? Let us consider the effect of chronic self-prescribed drug use upon the physical body, upon personality development, spiritual growth, and community relationships. From here on through the rest of this paper, I want to express my indebtedness to Dr. Howard Kleinbelt, who is Professor of Pastoral Counseling at the School of Theology at Claremont, California, whom I quote extensively. First, let's look at the area of damage to the physical body. And I know you've discussed this rather extensively already. Dr. R. Gordon Bell, a specialist in treating addictions, holds that excess in the use of any chemical eventually leads to body damage. Alcoholism often leads to malnutrition diseases. Barbiturate addiction may result in toxic psychosis and liver damage. Nicotine addiction is associated with lung cancer, and food addiction with a host of arteriocardiac problems. Amphetamine dependency leads to overtaxing the entire organism. Add to the long-range, cumulative physical harm from drug dependence the immediate hazards from drug-induced accidents and acts of recklessness or violence. For the Christian life is a gift and a trust to be lived to its fullest under the rule of love. This love expresses itself in deep respect for oneself as a child of God and in respect for and service to others. Damaging one's body, the instrument of loving service to others, is incompatible with the stewardship of life, respect for self and others, or affirmation of the basic goodness of creation. Damage to the personality. First, chemical comforters are used increasingly as a substitute for coping with the problems and challenges of living by means of personality resources. A person's ability to cope grows through use and atrophies through disuse. A full-color pharmaceutical ad in a medical journal listed these typical situations for which a particular tranquilizer is indicated. Family problems, financial worries, loss of work, retirement problems, death of a loved one, fear of cancer, pre- and post-operative fears, postpartum despondency, and many other stressful situations. I guess we can be grateful that they didn't include the fear of atomic attack or racial tension with other sources of stress. Reduction of excessive tension, of course, may be constructive, that is, in helping a person to cope with the unchangeable aspects of a difficult situation. But chemical tension reducers can allow a person to avoid facing and changing things that need changing and can be changed with struggle and sweat. The temporary use of chemical comforters in all the stressful situations listed in the ad, and the others which, in rather steady sequence, make up the fabric of life, can easily become a pattern of avoiding the struggle with feelings and problems which produces character and cope ability. The key question is whether the particular use of drugs facilitates or replaces constructive coping. And I presume that the person who is most able to discern this is the psychiatrist or the physician. A second form of personality harm is that which results from the chronic diminution or distortion of that part of man's equipment which is most distinctively human. In biblical language, this is described as the image of God in man, that is, man's rationality, awareness, consciousness, and ethical sensitivity. The dependency-inducing drugs appeal because they alter consciousness. The use of consciousness-dimming drugs to obtain a brief vacation from anxiety, inner conflicts, and heavy responsibilities may have positive values, allowing a person to return to the world of adult responsibilities with new vigor. But the drug-dependent person is using drugs in an effort to obtain a continual vacation from reality and anxiety. We should be aware of the inner pain which usually motivates such a search for chemical nirvana. But the compassion which such awareness brings need not preclude the realization that personality is being damaged further by the chemical means chosen in an effort to lessen the pain. As Rollo May and others have indicated, anxiety is integral to human existence and closely linked with creativity. Is it possible to continually anesthetize neurotic anxiety derived from inner conflict without also deadening the existential anxiety that is an essential fountain of creativity and full of humanity? You know, we say that most great artists are about half-cropped, or as a way of saying that there's something just a little bit, they've got their own hang-ups, but in the way in which they address themselves to these, somehow this stimulates their creativity. Or at least this is we see this frequently in temperamental artists and musicians. If it is true, as the existentialists in psychotherapy believe, that neurotic anxiety results from blocked growth and a lack of authenticity in living, then to drug this is to silence the signal that something at the center of one's life needs changing. How can a person work through it if he evades it chemically? As the experience in pastoral counseling demonstrates, tranquilizers and barbiturates can be used to mask powerful feelings, both positive and negative, which must be faced and worked through if growth toward fuller personhood is to occur. Psychiatrist Carl Menninger declares, "The public reads eagerly of new drugs to bring about temporary serenity. Some of us would be more interested in drugs that would evoke aspirations or spur a desire for learning or increase displeasure in wastefulness and self-preoccupation. We cannot be enthusiastic about chemical methods to produce a state of sans souci. What the world needs and what more human beings need for their own mental health and that of their universe is not to care less, but to care more. For this we have no chemicals. There are no drugs to keep the soul alert with noble discontent." Relationships are central in the Christian approach to wholeness, the love of God and neighbor. Therefore, the impact of drug dependence on relationships bears careful scrutiny. In strict moderation, the psychoactive drugs can have a positive influence on the quality of certain relationships. For example, a woman who takes an occasional tranquilizer during premenstrual tension may well be enabled to be more accepting and affirming in her mothering and wifing roles than would otherwise be possible. Or another example is the rigid person who might be somewhat more constructive in relationships if he could permit himself some occasional chemical comfort. In the case of the drug dependent, however, the influence of drugs is mainly to hinder or cripple relationships. There's a kind of chemical wall between such a person and the world around him. Even the overt physical intimacy of a pill party is probably pseudo-intimacy on a psychological level. Somehow there is a lack of real connection and of authenticity in relationships which could not exist without drugs. A doctor writes, "The picture of a snarling, vicious monkey transformed by a few milligrams of a chemical into a friendly, tranquil, happy animal, as seen in a national weekly, fascinates one in a frightening way." There's also something frightening about the thought of synthetic human relationships held together only by the artificial bond of psychoactive drugs. Christian insight and psychological research agree that personhood can find its true fulfillment and continuing wholeness only in genuine relationships, that is, relationships which strengthen mutual trust, integrity, self-esteem, cooperation, intimacy, mutual nurturing, and affection. Generally speaking, chronic drug dependency not only fails to strengthen these qualities in relationships, but it also tends to foster their opposites: mutual distrust, dishonesty, self-rejection, and self-centeredness. Defining Christian love as sensitivity and responsiveness to the needs of others, we would want to say that the entire process and inner dynamics of drug dependency tend to work against it. The person tends to center his world more and more on his magical, chemical, and his own subjective needs, relating to others mainly as means of satisfying these needs. Damage to spiritual growth. In one sense, any addiction is a form of idolatry in that something other than God is made the object of highest value and ultimate concern. The issues become more complicated in the chemically induced spiritual experiences associated with LSD and other hallucinogens. The search for chemical salvation reaches its peak in such LSD cults as the International Federation for Internal Freedom, or the League for Spiritual Discovery? A group which has many of the attributes of the religious sect. Devotees describe mystical and ecstatic experiences, union with the Eternal One, redeeming insight, and conversion experiences. One peyote user reported profound knowledge of self as a result of one session. Unlike the depressive drugs, which tend to constrict consciousness, the hallucinogens seem to cause it to expand in often bizarre ways through the dissolving of ego boundaries. Under LSD, one person reported the whole story of creation was in that single small leaf. 42% of those in one study looking back on their drug experience marked as true the statement that they were left with a greater awareness of God, of a higher power, or ultimate reality. Many subjects under LSD reported experiences strikingly similar to those of the mystics and visionaries of the past centuries. They felt they had come face to face with God and were overwhelmed with a sense of eternal beauty and infinite wisdom. One said, "I saw the eternal situation throbbing in space." How does one evaluate the validity of such mystical experiences? As Dale White has pointed out, the validity of any mystical experience, whatever its source, has in the Christian tradition been judged by its fruits. To ask the question in traditional terms, do LSD experiences result in the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? Galatians 5:22. Or put in psychological language, do they produce greater personality health, new integration, heightened awareness of reality, resolution of crippling conflicts, and more constructive relatedness to oneself, others, nature, and God? As yet, the evidence is fragmentary, but it seems to suggest that the great bulk of self-prescribed hallucinogenic drug-taking does not produce such results. To quote Houston Smith, who is a philosopher at MIT, drugs appear able to induce religious experiences. It is less evident that they can produce religious lives. Religion is more than religious experiences. Damage to community. In addition to these areas discussed by Dr. Kleinbauer, we should also be aware of the effects of drug dependence upon the addict's family, depriving them of the family member's full contribution and demoralizing the family in the face of society. Drug addiction undoubtedly weakens society as a whole through the encouragement of crime, theft among men, and prostitution among women to support their addiction. Insofar as addicts are unwilling and unable to work productively, society is deprived of their economic and social support. Of course, the vast illegal traffic in dope contributes to the general lawlessness of our society and adds its lucrative patch to the fabric of organized crime. Now, as in every other area of vice, there are those who advocate control by legalization. Some would have us follow the British system of a medically supervised maintenance dose treatment for registered addicts. Perhaps this would eliminate the fantastic profits in the illegal narcotics. The British government, however, has apparently discovered that such legalization has not diminished addiction in drugs or in gambling. The right of prescription has now been taken from individual physicians and restricted to hospital psychiatrists in an effort to stem the tide of rising addiction in Great Britain. Legalized vice tends to encourage dissipation by public approval and promotion. The challenge of a psychochemical age. The theological problems raised by all consciousness-changing drugs, and acutely by the hallucinogens, are only a foretaste of a vaster challenge posed by the imminent flowering of the age of psychochemistry. Harvard psychiatrist B.F. Skinner states, in the not-too-distant future, the motivational and emotional condition of normal daily life will probably be maintained in any desired state through the use of drugs. Such a brave new world prediction is no idle pipe dream. Learning drugs and drugs to improve concentration are not too far off. The military is developing cataplexogenics for paralyzing victims' limbs and confusants for use against whole populations as incapacitating agents by interfering with brain functioning. Such drugs could be used by unscrupulous leaders in a kind of 1984 Orwellian nightmare to enslave their own people or captive nations through chemical control of mood, thought, and behavior. Even if such diabolical uses are never implemented, it is almost certain that a wide variety of new psychoactive drugs will become available in the not-too-distant future for those who choose to use them. Many such drugs already exist, but have not yet been released for public use. New forms of synthetic human experience are sure to become available in the years immediately ahead. New drugs are being developed with such rapidity that even experts in the field of psychochemistry have trouble keeping abreast. The eventual use of these drugs will raise baffling new questions for parents, youth, educators, lawmakers, theologians, and physicians. The pastor and other professionals are being confronted today in the LSD controversy with questions that will assume even greater complexity and urgency in the years ahead. Our society stands on an awesome threshold, the beginning of ever greater manipulation of inner space. Now I'd like to suggest some of the ways in which the churches can work toward solution of the drug dependency, drug abuse problem. And I suggest these because I feel that the church is available in most all of our communities, and the interdisciplinary approach that's being made here to the study of this problem should be implemented in an attempt to solve the problem at the local level. First, the church has a role in education. Certainly the churches have a role in educating their members concerning the immorality and stupidity of drug abuse, even as previous educative efforts have been made by the churches in other areas of personal and public morality. In the Methodist Church, there is a department on alcohol problems and drug abuse in the General Board of Christian Social Concerns, which assists local churches in providing resource persons and curriculum materials for such educational projects. One project of this General Board is a providing of funds for graduate research papers in various areas of social problems, the developing of consultations at university centers such as this one to try to develop some stance so this particular stance can be implemented. The second Sunday in November is designated for alcohol and drug concerns emphasis in each local church. It's interesting. This is a new term. Years ago, the Sunday was principally a concern for, it was called Temperance, Commitment Sunday, to deal with the problem of alcohol. And admittedly, the stance of the Methodist Church used to be on this subject used to be primarily one of getting commitment to abstinence. But this emphasis, this concern has broadened, has matured, I think, to where we see, and now the Sunday is called Alcohol and Drug Concerns Emphasis. This is a new term coming out of our General Conference. And there is an attempt to broaden the education and the commitment required in this field. Obviously, some churches and pastors do nothing, but there are many who use the day to climax several weeks of study and preparation for commitment to certain voluntary positions with regard to the use and abuse of drugs. Local churches must do more to create an informed and concerned public opinion in this matter. In the area of law, the churches need to give moral support to our law enforcement agencies to ensure the strict enforcement of federal, state, and local laws in this field. Such support is also needed to encourage an impartial examination and revision of our present laws. Sometimes public opinion expresses little more than a self-righteous indignation and the demand for greater legal pressure against violators of narcotics laws. This is a principal reaction I've heard in Muncie, these recent arrests of some of our young people, and the principal concern that was raised a year ago. I know some of these people involved and been to the jail and talked with them while they were there and since they're out. I'm not underestimating the importance of the law enforcement, but I'm saying that generally speaking the public is delighted when we've got some hard-nosed officers or a legal enforcement division who are going to crack down on these dope fiends. And we see very little compassion or intelligent concern for rehabilitation, for trying to help these people work through their problem. And I feel the church has a responsibility to try to move our people from this kind of a legalistic, repressive approach to some concern. Of course, we see this in the whole field of need for penal reform and mental health and nearly every other area of social dis-ease. Some of our authorities believe our punitive approach to the drug abuser prevents rehabilitation. Recent conflict between the state of California and Cinecon over the halfway house care of narcotic parolees is an illustration of this point. Certain laws may be excessive against certain kinds of violations, such as marijuana use, and stronger controls for the use of barbiturates may be needed. I'm no expert in this field. I read the New York Times, and that doesn't make you an expert. Occasionally I read it and try to keep up on the information. And I wasn't able to attend earlier sessions of your seminar. But as you know, there is quite a debate on this matter of marijuana use, and strong positions on either side, since it's only recently been the THC, been isolated by American and Israeli scientists. And this has been tried. The New York Times indicates that in its concentrated form, it does have very detrimental effects on a person's personality and ability to cope and relate. Whether it's addictive, the form of marijuana and its influence apparently has varied according to the strength of the THC in the particular item sample that's used. So we don't know, I suppose, the final answer here. But it seems to me to put this unknown in the same category as some other hardcore addictive abuse may be subject to question. At least we ought to clearly examine our legalistic, repressive approach to it, which allows for little punitive approach, which allows for little experimentation, for far too little rehabilitation program. Additional legislation, I think, is needed to provide more adequately for the medical treatment of addicts, including possibly mandatory treatment of teenage addicts. There's a debate on, as you know, between a compulsory commitment and voluntary commitment. But what limited information I have seems to indicate that the results of compulsory commitment are higher in terms of rehabilitation than voluntary. I presume this is because as soon as a fellow gets off the drug, and same as somewhat with an alcoholic, once he's delivered from his immediate distress, he doesn't really sense the need to pursue the further steps of rehabilitation, counseling, and help. A repressive legalism in this field cannot solve the problem and may prevent society from seeing the addict's deeper humane needs for medical, psychiatric, and spiritual help. Treatment and rehabilitation. As already indicated, the churches can arouse and inform public opinion concerning the drug abuse problem, supporting law enforcement agencies where needed, but also encouraging a therapeutic concern for those suffering from drug dependency. More hospitals for the treatment of addicts and compulsory commitment, especially for teenage violators, is desperately needed. Cold turkey withdrawal behind prison doors is inhumane. Treatment and rehabilitation for addicts should become the rule rather than the exception. Local churches can hardly deal with the problems of drug addiction effectively through independent programs of their own, but in cooperation with other community agencies, the church can work with both the social and individual aspects of the drug problem. Pastors should be prepared for making referrals to proper agencies. Halfway houses in a local community could be sponsored by several agencies, including the churches, to provide the detoxified addict with a very necessary reintroduction to the local community after a period of treatment. And it's my understanding, though I haven't had any personal opportunity of such referral, that many an AA group is willing to accept, if there's no other agency available, is willing to accept a detoxified addict, person troubled with drug dependence, in their group. And I'm glad to have learned this, because we have an AA group that meets in our church weekly. And this may be a center somewhat local around the university here, where we could refer people, if we know of them, that are having problems, and also problems in their families. The pastor's role in helping the family of the drug dependent, and the principles of counseling there are much the same as with the families of alcoholics. Mental and social health. The churches must continue to address themselves to the factors which foster drug abuse. Drug abuse is but one fragment of the total human predicament in the last third of the 20th century, and to understand the problem, it must be so viewed. The widespread abuse of reality-blunting drugs obviously is the cause of extensive suffering, but it is also a response to the frustration, tragedy, and loneliness in our schizoid world. The $250 million U.S. market in happiness pills is a rough index of the staggering burden of unhappiness under which millions exist. Our major forms of social pathology, war, injustice, poverty, exploitation, discrimination, unequal opportunity, crippled family life, and so forth, all produce suffering within and between persons like a stagnant swamp breeds snakes and mosquitoes. Even at its best, human life holds inevitable loneliness and loss. Tragedy is woven into the cloth from which our existence is cut. The knowledge that we must die, as Martin Heidegger has observed, is the background music that plays faintly in the distance all during our lives. Man can bear this knowledge creatively only by the power which Paul Tillich called the power of the divine. This is the only power by which non-being is conquered. Millions of people in our society have not been able to find this power, and so are exposed to the full impact of what Erik Erikson has called the ego chill, which is existential anxiety. For many people, life is like one long surgical operation without benefit of anesthesia. Consequently, they have ample reason to crave the blessed oblivion of drug intoxication, which deadens their suffering for a brief time. It ill behooves those who are more fortunate to stand in judgment of them for their use of self-prescribed painkillers. All of this presents an inescapable challenge to the church at 2 points: its pastoral care ministry to the burden, and its prophetic concern for a more just and creative society. Whatever can be done by Christians working both individually and through church, community, and political organizations to cure our society's malignancies will help to reduce the motivation for drug abuse. Not the least of these malignancies is the deadly absurdity of the nuclear arms race towards species-wide annihilation, a chronic source of nihilism and mass anxiety which poisons the psychological atmosphere like fallout pollutes the physical atmosphere. Drug abuse, particularly by young people, cannot be understood apart from this tragic factor. Talking to one of our college-age young men, goes to school in Illinois and is home, in fact, I had the report from his father who talked to his son about these young people that were arrested here in Muncie, most of whom he went to high school with. And the parents were talking about, well, why in the world they did this, for kicks, for fun, and the boy, the young man, said, "No, Dad," he said, "I think you're wrong." He says, "I think they're searching for meaning." Now, you can take that as 10% right or 20% right, but I think his observation was that most of these fellows were brilliant fellows, even though they hadn't done well in school sometimes because they hadn't adjusted to the school groove. But he knew them as fellows who could. One fellow who could put an automobile machine, tear it down and put it back together blindfolded. He had a technical, tactile brilliance about him. And other boys who had artistic and creative ability. These weren't stupid kids. And his feeling was that they were groping for something in terms of meaning. So I think this is a factor that we have to look at in terms of the whole social situation. The vacuum in terms of values, the vacuum in terms of meaning in our society. The attractiveness of the pseudo-religious aspect of drug abuse is related to the problems which many people have in their search to find satisfaction of their basic religious hungers. Man's fundamental religious need has these elements. A, the need for an experience of the numinous and the transcendent, the awesome, that which is over against us. B, the need for a sense of meaning, purpose, and value in one's existence. C, the need to feel deep trust and relatedness to life. D, the need for an object of devotion. Unfortunately, for many people, contemporary religion has lost much of the sense of the transcendent and the numinous. It seems pale and anemic, lacking the mystical lift, the ecstatic moment, as Tillich put it. The recovery of greater spiritual vitality within our churches is imperative if we are to meet the needs of those who search for the numinous via the chemical route. Contemporary crisis in values, the product of an age of kaleidoscopic change, has made it difficult for many to find a viable philosophy of life. This makes them vulnerable to their anxiety of finitude, the certainty of death, the threat of meaninglessness, which in turn makes reality blunting or reality transcending drugs very attractive. Global uprootedness in our times has cut countless people off from the places and people with whom they felt some at-homeness. The decline in a sense of community resulting from this mass mobility makes us particularly vulnerable to existential loneliness, a sense of being orphans in an age, in a vast, impersonal, cold universe. This, plus the crisis in faith, symbolized by the Death of God movement, produces a situation described by Tillich, the anxiety which in its different forms is potentially present in every individual, becomes general if the accustomed structures of meaning, power, belief, and order disintegrate. If the churches can provide the kind of intimate, caring community where men and women may develop relationships which do not require drug participation for membership, groups of honesty and openness to each other and to God, if churches can be the means through which men and women, boys and girls grow in their sense of acceptance by God and their fellows, if here they are encouraged and enabled to face the tragedies of life and handle their own existential anxieties with ever-increasing strength, if the churches prove to be the communities of the redeemed and redemptive they claim to be, they can foster the kinds of Christian maturity and divine dependence among their members which need no crutch of glass or grass. I'm ready for your questions.
You who are visiting with us that we'd like to have your question as well as a response on tape, so we'll ask you to speak directly to the mic.
Dr. Starkey?
Wait. Raise your hand, yes.
From your reference to drug abuse being a form of idolatry, should we conclude that you feel that the Ten Commandments are still relevant and binding today?
Well, I think that you've got several questions wrapped up in that one. I would say that the preeminent issue for the Old Testament, certainly, and it's prominent in the New Testament literature, is the question of idolatry. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, I would say, yes, the Ten Commandments are relevant. I think we have to see what they point. I have to understand from that culture what they point to for our culture. But I'd say that the preeminent emphasis of the Ten Commandments, the first table, so-called, first few of them, deals with this whole matter of the primacy, the ultimacy of God as over nation, state, as over self, as over race, as over family, as over anything else. Now, Tillich prefers to speak of God as our ultimate concern, and that which concerns us ultimately. That, in a sense, that to which we give our first commandment, our first loyalty. And theologically, I think, and biblically, the problem for man is this problem of idolatry, that we tend, the Greeks called it Hebrews in the tragedies, the presumption to step out of place and be far in excess of what we're created to be, the tendency to play God, and consequently orient life and other people and society around our own limited point of view. This is the danger for society or for man. It's a question of perspective, too, isn't it? A question of some judgment on things. Put things in their proper place. And we can't do that if we're number one or if my nation's number one, so forth. So I think that certainly the Ten Commandments are very relevant for today. And this, especially in this first table, which the second table tends to elaborate in terms of relationship to other peoples. Love, and Jesus summarized it, love God and love neighbor.
Dr. Starkey, you mentioned in your speech that the one Sunday in November is being devoted to this problem. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned that in the past, the goal of the church has been to elicit a pledge of abstinence. Mm-hmm. One of the problems that young people facing the world today are saying is that the church is adjusting to society rather than setting standards mm-hmm. for living and so forth. Is this an indication that the church is not necessarily advocating abstinence, that they're taking on a more liberal point of view?
Well, I think this is a good question. I think that this isn't today's problem, though, and I can relate it to the other one. I think Moses came down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments precisely because the children of Israel were adjusting. You see, they were, and always we try to adjust. Always there is this problem of over-accommodating to the crowd. Who is our audience, you see? Who do we play to for our primary approval? And if it isn't God, then it will be the crowd, or it will be the drift of society, or something else. This is where do we get our clues for life, or our basic approval? So I would say that the problem of over-accommodation is always with us. This is again the problem of idolatry, and we have to fight it, like the devil. We have to now. I would also say that every age has to rethink its philosophical and theological premises over again. This is why we write history and philosophy, and it's every generation rewritten, because we have to enter into the dialogue. We have to understand what the past has to say to us, and what the present situation is challenging us to. So I would say that there is this real delicate balance between trying to understand what God what is saying to us today, what the Christian faith implies, the love ethic implies for today, and the danger of being legalistic. I don't think it was all finally said in the Ten Commandments, and the other of just over-accommodating with the situation as we find it. Now, the question is whether the change in abstinence, should we just on alcohol and other issues continually, rigidly to say you shan't drink, you see, or you shan't use drugs and leave it there because this is bad morally. Well, in the first place, I don't think most people today will listen to this approach. I mean, I don't think... I think we live in a day when just sheer authoritarianism just doesn't come across. So that to build an ethical position, you've got to show people some reasons why. Does it damage the body? Does it damage the personality? Does this hinder the fulfillment of human life? And then let them make their decisions. And I think the position of the church has moved somewhat away from this authoritarian position to a position more voluntary, an attempt to lay out the reasons, the problems, and in view of our loyalty to God and our love for neighbor, then to let people arrive at their own positions. The consensus would be, I think, you would find many people who would say, therefore, I believe in voluntary abstinence, say, from some of these things, because because of these various reasons. But the tendency, I think, is to try to let people arrive at this themselves. Because finally, if they don't do this, and if they don't commit themselves to it from within, it probably won't last in our kind of an open, pluralistic society anyway. That was awfully involved. Did I get your, speak to your question?
We've heard some people take drugs to find religion. What's your attitude toward this?
Yeah. Well, as I tried to say in the paper, I think that there is certainly testimony from these people who feel that drugs have led to some sort of experience of the ultimate, and that the way they describe this is quite akin to the historic and classic expressions of the saints, the mystics of the past and present. Peyote has been used traditionally in religions of Indians in the Southwest and in Mexico. I mean, you can find patterns for this way back. Now, the question, I think, as Dale White puts it, how do we judge any kind of a mystical experience? And we judge generally in the Christian tradition in terms of its results, or the biblical word is the fruits. Does this lead to a changed life, a life which is more better integrated, more whole, better related to God and neighbor and world? Because we realize, as Houston Smith said, that there is such thing as religious experiences, but they don't exist for themselves alone. If people are only doing this to cultivate certain kind of bizarre experiences, this isn't religion. What does it do to change their lives? In other words, the mystical experience, the sense of God's presence, the ultimate, also should result in changed life. And there doesn't seem to be much evidence that this has happened. But, of course, this intense experience we've had with it is only recent, and I certainly would see the need to be open to the information that we have and study this. I think this thing really needs to be studied as a prelude to what may come in a greater kind of a chemical inundation in the future. Now, my question is that my answer is that a Christian generally doesn't feel that he has to use doesn't believe he needs chemicals to induce spiritual experiences, and what use of them there has been doesn't seem to lead to any kind of a changed life, and this is the other factor in the experience. Dick?
You mentioned that not too much experimentation has been done in the field of marijuana research and in the field of THC. Would you favor such experimentation in order so that we could compare it more directly to alcohol or other habit-forming drugs?
I think I would be in favor of, and this is just one guy's private opinion, not so well informed. I would be in favor of experimentation under close controls, and I mean, we're doing it everywhere else. I don't see why we can't do it here. To find out, I think we'd have to some way. With safeguards and controls on the matter. Now, I think the more crucial issue here is, are we willing to allow experimentation on detoxification, on cure, which allows the clinical administration of drugs, gradual withdrawal, and so forth. Now, this is, of course, against the law, too, and as I understand in this country. And there are physicians and groups that very much want to use this. I think this was the issue between Synecon and the California state people, was that there was suspicion that Synecon was using some illegal drugs for withdrawal treatment, prevent cold turkey. And now the fellows who were called up on their parole for this wouldn't admit it. Took the Fifth Amendment, wouldn't admit it. and we're advised to do so. But however, this is inconsistent. I understood that Senecon has traditionally taken the position they don't use drugs. So there's a lot of a fight there. But I think there ought to be grounds for medical experimentation.
One of our speakers said that one of the reasons that some young people turn to drugs is because the church has lost its place in their life, and even though the church has tried to adjust with new programs, it still hasn't done much good. Do you feel that the church will come back to this place that it supposedly once held?
Well, I think that I think some churches do and some don't. And I think that there are churches where there are especially experimentation in small groups, where there are vital small groups in a sense of prayer life and of a redemptive community, which are kind of a therapeutic group, a community where there's a real vitality, spiritual vitality, say. I think the big problem, will the church be able to recover the sense of the transcendence, the awesomeness, the wonder? I mean, the trouble is, this has almost been squeezed out of our whole culture, you see, except as it slips in now in folk music, pop songs. I mean, there's a hunger for it, and there's a searching for it, and yet all the time we have this rather harsh a flat view of reality, really a flat view of reality as promoted by a scientific and technological age, which I think is, in the very fact that you've raised the question, is an inadequate view of reality, it's an insufficient view of reality. It tries to squeeze out the depths of life and the heights of life. And man hungers for this and will search for it in other ways. I hope that the church can... so what I'm saying is, the church in its attempt to... where it has the problem of over-accommodating, it becomes flattened too, because that seems to be where the action is in our society. Will the church be able to redefine the sense of the heights and the depths of life in a language and in an experience that people can understand? I don't know. I think that it's to be found in places. I think in other places it's pretty dead. I think that there are many ways that people are asking the religious questions, though, and seeking for answers. And drug dependence and alcohol and some of these others, maybe some of these ways.
I was going to go back to the point that one of the other members of the class had mentioned on the liberalism of the church. As I understand it, the Christian belief is a discipline, and as Paul said, that it's a daily sacrifice or a daily crucifixion in order to perfect Christianity. And then how does this new liberalism of adjusting to society, drugs as well as any other area, fits into this discipline which seems to characterize Christianity?
Well, Paul also said that we're to be all things for all people, and the New Testament suggests we're to live in the world and not be of the world. I think there is this in the New Testament, and every century since, there's been this problem of being either of retreating. The basic problem is how do we live? How do we be human? How do we recognize our humanity today? And we live in today's world with today's problems. And if the faith is relevant at all, it's got to be related to us as we live today. I mean, as far as that's concerned, you can say that the New Testament doesn't say anything literally about drug dependence. So you can read clear through the Bible and not talk about any of these problems. And so there would be some people who say that this subject isn't even, we shouldn't even be talking about it in church. The Bible doesn't mention it, let's forget it. We retreat within our little walls, and talk about something else. Well, I think that what we need to do is to see that the relationship to God and the relationship to man, the worldview that's implied here, the ethic of love, in the biblical faith and in Christian tradition, does have something to say to every human situation. And the human situation that we have now, though different from the first century, raises the questions to which the Christian faith speaks. So we have to, in our churches and in university and every area of life, constantly ask what's God's will and purpose for my full humanity, for true community in the world today in which I live. Now this means that we have to watch against selling out to the value structures that are current, and this has been done at times. It's been done in our own society by the church. On the other hand, that's one extreme. Retreat within little irrelevant monasteries that somehow relate to the past. And the other extreme is to over-accommodate and lose our real sense of the religious Christian.
And then one more. If you had mentioned it, Carl, a little bit earlier, you brushed against it, on the thing of a Christian does not believe that he needs to take drugs to satisfy a spiritual need or to have a spiritual